Hi, welcome to our Friends at Home event. My name's Karen Manuel. I'm a member of the Friends of the Alameda Free Library. The Friends of the Alameda Free Library. FAL is a nonprofit organization that raises money to support the many services and programs of the Alameda Free Library. This is a live webinar. So happy to tell you that tonight we've been given permission to record this event, and the recording will be available for you and the public to view on our YouTube channel in a few days. Your microphones and cameras are turned off. Please communicate with us and with each other via chat. We love to hear where you're joining us from, and please add any questions that you have about the program or about Vermeer, which will be answered live at the end of the event. Please treat everyone with respect in the chat. We monitor the chat and will remove anyone from the event who is disrespectful. As a nonprofit, you're probably not surprised to know that we appreciate your donations. We don't charge for these events because we want everyone to be able to see the events regardless of their ability to pay. If you enjoyed this program, please consider a donation in any amount. A link will be made available in the chat soon, and you can also make a donation through our website at alamedafriends.com. We're all here to learn more about Vermeer and the amazing exhibit of his paintings currently on display at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Vermeer was not a very prolific painter, and we only know of about 37, our speaker will tell us more, probably 37 paintings in the world that still exist. And 28 were originally on display at the Rijksmuseum, and now there's 27. One went back to its collection. They've been collected from all over the world to make this collection the largest collection of Vermeer paintings ever in one place at one time. It truly is a lifetime, once in a lifetime exhibit. So we'll be guided tonight by Avril Angevine. Avril is a Humanities and English instructor at local colleges and a museum guide at both the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and the Oakland Museum. She's an independent art lecturer and has presented many of our docent programs. She's a crowd favorite, and she's always informative and engaging as a presenter. So I'd like to welcome Avril tonight. I know this will be a wonderful program, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about Vermeer.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karen, and thank you. Sunnyvale is good, but there's somebody in Texas and San Diego, all over the place. Oakland, yay, there we go.
That's great.
Excellent, really cool. Be interesting to see if anybody was in Amsterdam, but I know Karen has just been there, and others of you perhaps have, but for those of us who are not able to go to this once in a lifetime exhibition, we'll have a little tour right now. So I'm gonna, hi from Berkeley and Fairfax. Share the screen here, bring this up. Yeah, the magic, mystery, and mastery of Vermeer, Johannes Vermeer, who is, of course, one of the world's favorite artists, as the large turnout here tonight kind of suggests for us. He's one of the masters of 17th century Holland, when an astonishing roster of wonderful artists created the first works really aimed at middle-class buyers rather than the aristocracy. So that in these works, we see the daily life of ordinary citizens, not the doings of gods and goddesses and aristocrats, and we take in sober Dutch values rather than Baroque excess. In the work of Johannes Vermeer, we find undeniable technical mastery, but there's also a good amount of magic and mystery about Vermeer too. So, as I said, for those of us who are not going to be able to go to the exhibit, not traveling to Holland this week, and it's difficult to get a ticket, they sold out on the first day, although I think they made more available. In any case, we're going to take a little tour through it right now. So we're going to the Rijksmuseum. There it is, the Dutch National Museum in Amsterdam, which began actually in The Hague in 1798 in several rooms of one of the 3 Dutch royal residences. Now, unlike the collection of the Louvre, for example, the Dutch National Collection didn't originate in royal holdings. It was acquired slowly by donation and purchase, and didn't originally include Rembrandt, Frans Hals, or Vermeer. The museum was moved to Amsterdam in 1808, and the current red brick fantasy there was completed in 1885 and reopened after a 10-year refurbishment in 2013. Now, normally there are only 4 works by Vermeer at the Rijksmuseum, but through June 4th, 28, or I guess now, as Karen says, 27 of Vermeer's 37 known works will be on display in what dozens of commentators have declared an exquisite, elegant exhibition. The paintings are widely spaced. Some have a room of their own, with ticket sales limited so that visitors experience the kind of calm and stillness depicted in the paintings, perhaps. And these velvet-covered barriers in front of the artworks allow visitors to lean in for long minutes of contemplation. Well, I guess we do have to expect some crowding around the Dutch Mona Lisa. There she is. Now, there are more Vermeer works together in this exhibit than the painter himself ever saw together in his own lifetime. And the appeal of the exhibit is such that the hunt is now on for the 9 or so missing works of Vermeer, things mentioned in old inventories or wills or so forth, including a self-portrait, which would be the find of this century or any century, a third outdoor view, and such tantalizing subjects as woman combing her hair, visit to the tomb, which I assume is a biblical work, painter playing a violin, and woman eating oysters and pouring wine. We'd love to see that one. So I want to start with some of the mysteries of Vermeer. For one thing, he painted no portraits. Though he did some works on commission, he didn't paint specific individuals, a shocking omission in this era of the portrait. He didn't do singles like this. He didn't do doubles. And he didn't do group portraits, which was actually the bread and butter of many of these 17th century painters. And he did not do any self-portraits. And you know, somebody like Rembrandt did dozens, if not hundreds. Now, this work, the Procurus, is considered possibly, the man in the upper left, possibly is a self-portrait, but that's not known for sure. This is actually one of only 3 works that he signed and dated. That's unusual. Now, another mystery of Vermeer concerns the meaning of his works. They're not really what we call genre paintings, but they aren't portraits either. They suggest a narrative and hint at a moral. And this was something frequent in Dutch paintings of the era, when flower paintings like this one reminded us of the brevity of life, right? All these beautiful flowers, which don't exist together really in real life. They are born and they die. And that's why there's often a watch in works like this to remind us that time's passing. So we have that kind of thing. And in works like this, like by Jan Steen, notice at the upper left, you see a monkey up there. When you see a monkey in a painting like this, you know there's bad business going on. So these are filled with sort of morals. When a housewife is sleeping, all kinds of stuff goes on. Pigs are in the room and everything, crazy stuff. So this is not atypical in works of this era. But the biggest mystery of all concerning Vermeer is really the man himself. He left no letters, nor are there any descriptions of his methods written by contemporaries or by sitters. He left no drawings, but there is documentary evidence of the sort that researchers ferret out. Legal depositions, wills, promissory notes, and so forth. And most importantly, a household inventory compiled after Vermeer's death that includes many of the props we see in his works. For instance, that yellow fur-trimmed jacket that I would just absolutely love to have, musical instruments, Persian carpets, and so on. Now, crucially, in this inventory, there is no mention of a camera obscura, the device that many people, including artist David Hockney, are convinced Vermeer used to create his uncanny images. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, some undisputable facts. Vermeer was born in 1632 and lived and died in Delft, which at the time was a smallish, conservative Protestant town famous for beer brewing. Here it is in Vermeer's wonderful rendering at 7 o'clock in the morning, with 2/3 of the painting in the sky, with these unusually low clouds. Fun fact, by the way, when the writer Marcel Proust saw this painting in Paris in May 1921, he was so struck by it that he has one of the main characters in Search for Lost Time, in his big novel, die of a heart attack in front of the painting. Touched him that much. Now, at the beginning of the 17th century, there were more than 100 breweries in Delft, though there were only 15 or so by 1670. This is why they had a lot of beer, or what happens with a lot of beer, one or the other. As the breweries declined, the manufacture of Delft blue pottery grew. In Vermeer's day, Delft pottery hadn't reached the ubiquity of later times. We see tiles like this in his works, but we don't see the kind of showy pottery that turns up later. Still, it was reckoned that Delft potters were the best, as they seemed to copy the Chinese to perfection, and that is what you do with one of those. You put tulips in it. Now, Vermeer's father, who was a silk weaver, owned a tavern, which was also an art dealership. Nothing is known of Vermeer's childhood. He must have served an apprenticeship in the 1640s, but his teacher is unknown, although it may have been Karel Fabricius, who painted one of the other stars of Dutch 17th century painting, the Goldfinch, work that I'm sure you know. Vermeer never went abroad to study, but the family art dealership, which he inherited at 20, must have provided him with a range of styles to learn from. He married a well-to-do Catholic woman, Katharina Bolness, in 1653, and the couple moved into the family's house, where Vermeer painted in the upstairs front room. Now, this house had 11 rooms, most of them designed for a specific use. This was rare in the 17th century. Family life certainly kept Vermeer busy. He had 15 children, 11 of whom lived to maturity, besides working as an art dealer, an innkeeper, and eventually as head of the local painters guild. Maybe painting was just a side hustle for him. As a painter, he was an extremely slow worker and produced only 2 or 3 works a year. There are, as I said, about 35, 36 known, though perhaps a dozen or so have been lost. Now, it's always been thought that he had no apprentices or pupils, because such assistants would have to have been registered with the guild, and none ever were. However, one critic has made the case that, in fact, Vermeer's daughter, Maria, not only worked with him, but painted a few of what are considered his lesser works, if you can imagine such a thing. This theory was roundly dismissed until recently, when it was discovered or realized that an artist's own children needn't be registered as apprentices. Well, whatever the reason, Vermeer worked slowly and produced surprisingly few works, given the impact he would have later on the art world. That is, much later. Vermeer was a respected artist in Delft, but he was almost unknown outside his hometown. A local patron, a woman named Maria de Knuit, purchased most of his work. It wasn't until the 1860s, that is 2 centuries after his death, that his works became sought after, many entering American Gilded Age collections in the buying frenzy of the 1920s. Now, the Met in New York has 5, that's the largest number anywhere. The Frick has 3. The National Gallery has 4, and here the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston had 1 until it very carelessly lost it. I mean, it was stolen in 1990. So enough mystery. Let's talk about the magic of Vermeer, those solitary women calmly going about some private business in a room very much like the one Vermeer painted in, lit by that incredible pearl gray Dutch light. He hit on this subject after a few experiments. Early in his career, he was about 21, he made a few mythological subjects like Diana and her nymphs. Whoops, what's that doing? Okay, Diana and her nymphs, there we go, which is at the Maurits house, no doubt to cater to the classical tastes of the court in The Hague. And he did at least one biblical subject here, Christ in the House of Mary and Martha, which is in the Scottish National Gallery. Now, his conversion to Catholicism on his marriage, which was rare in the 17th century Netherlands, appears to have been sincere, and perhaps this is a sign of it. But it may also have been painted for a client, we don't know. The work shows his understanding of classical, that is Italian art, and that of his contemporaries. But it really does begin to look like a Vermeer. There are three very solid figures very close together in a room, and that's the essence of a Vermeer. Now, the first work that really shows the style and subject that we associate Vermeer is this one, The Maid Asleep, which is at the Met. This is actually not in the exhibit, but it's cool, so I brought it in. Here we have a young woman in a defined, fairly dark room that has a door and a lighted space behind, so we don't have the light coming in from the left as usual. We've got a nice carpet on the table, which is typical of the Dutch, since Persian carpets like this were too expensive to go on the floor. And it's crumpled up as though someone has been sitting there. So is there a story? What could be the story? X-rays have shown that there was once a man in the doorway and a dog, but Vermeer took them out. And in fact, very recent research has indicated that what looks like a window through the door there may have been an easel, and so that the man standing in the door was actually the artist painting a picture. We don't know for sure. Now, the title of this work in a 1696 auction gives us a hint of the story. It was called Drunk Woman Sleeping. But there's no hint of moralizing here, as there is in the work of a contemporary and rival of his, Nicholas Maas, where we have the idle servant. And so again, we have kind of a moral going on here. Don't do this, don't act like this, right? But we don't see that in Vermeer. Likewise, in The Milkmaid, which is one of the Rijksmuseum's paintings, mostly Vermeer takes us into rooms where a quiet scene like this is going on. And in this painting, once again, we find a fairly rare example of a maid treated in an empathetic and dignified way, the figure monumentalized, almost the way goddesses and saints would be treated by other artists. And let's take a kind of a tour around this painting with our eyes and see where we get. Where do our eyes take us? Directly to the milk pouring out of that pitcher, that white milk there. The point of view is slightly below, and the light on her arms focuses us on the milk. And in fact, the painting is built up along two diagonal lines that meet right at the woman's right wrist. So the line of her head, her shoulder, and so forth, and from the other side, the basket and on down. And they focus us on the milk. To the right of the figure, the wall is brightly lit and the arm is dark. And to the left, the wall is dark and the arm is lit. So all these devices help us center right on the pitcher and the milk. There's a large, bright, empty space behind her, but infrared radiography has revealed the existence of a large clothes basket that Vermeer painted out, possibly not to complicate the issue or take interest or focus away from the milkmaid, don't know. So let's use these elements to kind of dig into the meaning of the work by looking at them again. So, okay, milk, 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 we're focusing on milk here. Well, that suggests motherhood, of course, and propriety. And the woman seems to be making bread pudding. That is, she's using dried up bread crusts, soaking them and turning them into a dessert that way. This is very, very thrifty, and this would be an absolutely positive virtue at this point. And this, combined with the solidity and monumentality of the figure, suggests that she's almost like a model of behavior in some way. But milk is also associated with breasts, with sensuality, and kitchen maids, and especially milkmaids at the time, were considered to be sexually available in some way. Probably just by repute, by rumor, but that was the thinking. Now that is actually counteracted, though, by the symbology of the foot warmer on the lower right, that box below her on the floor. So this is something that would have coal in it to, keep you warm in a room like this. But in paintings of this time, you'll see them a lot. And if you see a nice married woman might be sitting down with a foot warmer under her skirt so that you can't see it. If the woman has her foot on a foot warmer peeking out from under her skirt, that means she's receptive to a male suitor, shall we say. And if the foot warmer is completely out, not under the skirt at all, and empty of coals particularly, it indicates a single woman. And that's what we have here. So that's a signal that she's kind of a chaste woman. But this kitchen, of course, is not properly heated, as that indicates. In the best houses, there'd be two kitchens, a hot kitchen for daily cooking for meats and so forth, bread, and a cold kitchen reserved for baking pastries and so forth, cold so that butter wouldn't melt and could be folded into the dough. Now, in this milk too, this is interesting. In urban areas, it wasn't really drunk very much because it would probably spoil before it could be consumed. But even in urban areas, many households produced butter and cheese, for which hygiene is really important. So that white wall behind her not only is formally important to light the figure up, but it keys people to the fact that this is a proper house with clean walls where you could make some nice cheese and beer and everything else. So as clear as this is in one way, it's like a frozen moment. There's a little hint of ambiguity in it about the figure and what she's doing and so forth. It's a wonderful, wonderful painting, as is this one. Also from the Rijksmuseum, Woman in Blue reading a letter. Now, letters figure in 6 of Vermeer's works, that is 1/6 of his output. The Netherlands had the highest literacy rate in Europe at the time, and letter writing, of course, was a popular pastime in general, but also it was a slick way for lovers to interact without supervision. Maids who actually got out and about more than bourgeois women were often given the job of delivering letters. Now, in one way, this image is very interior because it's in a room and she's in herself reading this letter. But the letter itself and the map behind her hint at a world beyond. So the map of the Netherlands on the wall was both a typical wall decoration of the period and a subtle patriotic reminder that in the 17th century, the tiny Netherlands was successfully fighting the mighty Spanish Empire, and the Netherlands ruled over a far-flung commercial empire that was the source of the wealth of his subjects here. Investigators have identified the maps that Vermeer copied and have determined that they are uncannily accurate, and Amsterdam itself was a center of map production. Now, the girl is wearing a bed jacket in ultramarine blue, the king of the pigments, made from crushed lapis lazuli stone imported from Afghanistan via Venice. Most artists reserved it for very special usage, which is why the Virgin Mary is usually wearing blue. But Vermeer used it liberally, not only in the jacket, which is completely blue, but he's used it in the shadows on the wall and on the ball that's holding the bottom of the map, likewise the chair that's there as well. And then we have the orange ribbons on her jacket that direct our attention to that letter. Now, maps were not, of course, the only wall decor in 17th century Holland. In this work, we might think the lovely white wall makes a good background to the reading woman, as it does in The Milkmaid. But in 2017, X-rays revealed an image on the wall, subsequently painted out. It's a giant Cupid, an image of a giant Cupid that's known to have been an image like that in his mother-in-law's home. So the conservators decided to take the overpainting off, as it hadn't been done by Vermeer. And thus we have a completely new image with a not so subtle suggestion of what the letter's about. So you look at that. Let's look back at this one. And I am not sure this is an improvement, but I will leave that to you to judge. Here's another lovely work, very close up, the lace maker that's in the Louvre. This is about as close up as we get in a painting by Vermeer. So here we have a beautifully dressed middle-class woman is intently working on the intricate task of making bobbin lace. Lace, of course, was expensive when it's handmade, and that's the only way it was made in those days. So this image shows us the contradictory values of the Dutch. They're wealthy through colonial trade, but industrious, sober, and Calvinistic. This is the paradox that Simon Schama talks about in his book about the 17th century, The Embarrassment of Riches. Now, our lace maker, of course, has it both ways. Notice that the threads she's working on are fairly clear, but the ones in the sewing cushion, which is the blue thing in the front, the threads are pouring out, are made just of dots. They're actually less distinct than the threads she's working on. So this change in depth of focus is interesting. This is something that you do in a photograph, but this is not the way that eyes really work. And I'll talk about this with another work later on. She's also got a strange triangular lace making table, of which no example is said to survive. And only one other painting of the time includes one. And by the way, I said this painting is in the Louvre, and Pierre Vermeer said this is the second most beautiful painting in the Louvre. Leaves you to guess what the first one is. Now, women are not always alone in Vermeer's works, as we see in this music lesson, Lady at a Virginal, which is owned by, or is usually present in Windsor Castle. So this one is not as close up as the last one, of course, and there's lots going on in here for us to see and think about, though, once again, a real resolution is not forthcoming. Now, the reason we don't talk about realistic art is that even when we see something like this that is almost photographic in his presentation, it's not really realistic. It's totally idealized, an idealized scene. The furnishings are quite rich. I mean, look at the beautiful floor, the marble floor, and that huge carpet that's on the table. The spare, well-ordered room is really contrived, sort of like these magazine photographs of beautiful bathrooms that never have a water pick on them, just an orchid in a basket, something like that. So who do you suppose this man is standing there next to the girl who's playing the virginal? Is he her teacher? Well, he's wearing a sword, so probably not. More likely he's a suitor. And why is that empty chair there? Who was there? Who just got up? We don't know. So it's a story that's unclear. And notice above the virginal, there's a mirror. And in the mirror, we can see a reflection of the girl's face, but she's turned more towards the man than would seem to be logical from the way we see her. So maybe this is another perspective trick, like we see in Manet's famous bar at the Folies Bergère, where it looks like the reflection of the woman is not where we would assume it to be. So we don't know. Now, also in the mirror, above the virginal, at the top of the mirror, there's a reflection of an easel. So that's another possibility that he is somewhere in the back painting this scene. This is a mystery. Another couple, officer and laughing girl. Now here, these two are very close together, but the man is quite a bit bigger. This is a technique called a repoussoir, something that's a way of achieving perspective or spatial contrast by putting a large figure, a large object in the immediate foreground. It focuses our attention back on her, and he's much darker too. There's a story here. Again, she's quite happy. She's got a wine glass in her hand. And here's a little diagram from the time showing painters how to hold a wine glass and how to paint a wine glass. And I think she's in position number 5 there, which is the proper one. Now, the map above her, believe it or not, is the same map as in the girl in blue, though this time it's colored. It's hard to read because the west is at the top. North being at the top was not standard yet. And oddly enough, the land masses, not the water, are blue. However, it's possible that these blue areas were once glazed with a transparent yellow glaze, giving them the correct green that we would expect. This was standard practice, especially by still life painters, for the depiction of leaves. But the yellow glaze was prone to degrade and reveal the blue underpainting underneath. So there's lots of ways that paintings of this era degenerate and their images, their colors particularly change. Now, the introduction of his ultramarine blue into the wall's deep shadows produced a sense of sparkling morning light that really has no precedent in European painting. And in case you didn't notice, the dress the girl is wearing is the same one as in the Virginal, the music lesson. So it was in his stock of beautiful clothes. Now, I know you've come here to see the girl with the pearl earring. Here she is, as ambiguous as her southern counterpart. So, question is this an image of innocence or an image of sensuality? Let me make the case. So, in the first place, this is not a portrait, it's what's called a trony. And a trony was an image, a practice image that painters would do to try out expressions or different kinds of people in costume, showing a certain type of physiognomy, an interesting character, like an old man, a soldier, the shepherdess, or so forth, a person of a particular race. Tronies were popular in the 17th century. They were cheap. And many Rembrandts, including many of his self-portraits, are in this category. So this is something where he's doing his own face, practicing an expression of, I don't know what that is, horror, perhaps, shock, surprise. So that's what's going on here. So here, what we've got is the image of an idealized, beautiful European girl with a skin that very few people would have had at the time when smallpox was so frequent and many people bore its scars on their face. She's wearing a Turkish turban that only a man would have worn, and what was always thought to be a very, very large pearl as an earring. So, of course, in the 17th century, pearls were an important status symbol, as they were even earlier. You know, when you think of portraits of Queen Elizabeth I, she always has these ropes of pearls on. One this size would have been way expensive. But imitation pearls were being produced so that people of more modest means could afford them. In fact, Venetian glassmakers became so successful at creating artificial pearls that by the 16th century, they could be given corporal punishment if they were caught forging pearls. Now, this one, they speculate that it's pewter or polished tin from the pear shape and the large size. It's really too large to actually be a pearl. But of course, in reality, it's just paint. Two splashes of white paint, one below to reflect the collar and one above. Now, who is this girl? Is it his daughter? Is it a maid in his family who's modeling for this? We don't know. Now, as with the milkmaid, we can wonder whether this is an image, as I said, of innocence or kind of sensuality. Notice that her lips are parted and he has the white highlights on them, making them look nice and moist, and that over the shoulder look. So the combination of these two is standard operating procedure for Playboy advertisements of all sorts. So who knows, perhaps this image is intended to have a different charge than we've always thought it has. Now, Girl with the Pearl Earring, of course, is the most famous work in the Mauritshuis Museum in The Hague. And to fill the gap while the work is in Amsterdam, the Mauritshuis launched an open call soliciting temporary Girl with the Pearl Earring substitutes made in any medium. They received nearly 3,500 portraits. The girl reimagined as a dog, as a dinosaur, as an elephant. I saw one where she looks like Mark Zuckerberg with a turban on and so forth. Some made her out of buttons or beads, others with stick figures and so forth. So the museum selected 170 of them to display on rotation in a digital frame, while 5 others were printed out and mounted on the wall, including this one by a German artist named Julian van Dieken, the girl with the glowing earrings. This is an AI-generated version. So as you can imagine, the reaction to this was as savage as you can think, as you can imagine. But the museum responded, they just liked it, and they selected what they liked, and there you go. Now, 2 more of Vermeer's tronies have generated their own controversy. Let's see them. So in Girl with a Red Hat, the girl is wearing a rakish man's hat. In fact, women didn't wear hats in Holland at this time. They wore kerchiefs and so forth. And the light, unusually in this painting, is coming from the right. He almost always has the lit from the left. Now, the girl with the flute also features an unusual hat, a Chinese striped hat In fact, striped fabrics were a novelty brought from Asia by Dutch traders. It's hard for me anyway to imagine a world that did not have striped fabrics in it, but there you go. Now, both these works are owned by Washington's National Gallery, and they're on view all the time. During the pandemic, when the museum closed, they took the opportunity to take their four Vermeer and subject them to intense technological analysis, which allows researchers to look at pigments and patterns below the surface, things the artist changed, and so forth. Now, both tronies are on wood panel, not on canvas, and they were done at about the same time. They can tell that because of the wood. But guess what? Researchers discovered that the girl with the flute there on the right was painted by, and I'm going to quote from their press release, someone who understood the Dutch artist's process and materials, but was unable to completely master them. Who would that be? Who could possibly do that? The painting's top pigment is more coarsely ground than in the more authentic girl with the red hat. And the brushwork they consider to be awkward. The hands of the girl with the flute are remarked upon, some saying they look like pig's trotters. And of course, you know that the face and the hands were always the most difficult things to paint. And in a painter, an old master painter who had a studio, the assistants might do everything else, but the master would always do the face and the hands, particularly because they're difficult. But I noticed in Girl with a Red Hat, we don't see any hands at all, so we can't quite tell. Anyway, who would this have been to paint this, who was familiar with his work since he had no assistants? A lone voice in the wilderness, a scholar named Benjamin Binstock, suggested a decade ago that it could well have been Vermeer's daughter, Maria. And he was dismissed roundly by everybody in the critical community because it was only now the National Gallery's work is the first scientific evidence that suggests at all another hand at work in these paintings. Nevertheless, Girl with the Flute is in the Rijksmuseum exhibit, so they consider it a Vermeer, even if the National Gallery says, maybe not. They've agreed to disagree about the attribution. Well, here's a cool picture. A woman with red hair looking at the woman with a red hat. So you can see how tiny it is. That's nice. Now, it's time to finish by discussing Vermeer's mastery. Let's look at the most significant omission from the exhibition, his work called The Art of Painting, which is in Vienna, which was determined to be too fragile to travel. It's one of the largest of his paintings. We don't know what motivated Vermeer to produce it, but his widow gave it to her mother to protect it from creditors after his death. This painting is also exceptional because of its allegorical subject. It shows a painter, presumably Vermeer, although I don't think we can count anything showing a back view as a self-portrait exactly, but it's probably Vermeer, painting a model of Clio, the muse of history. So the mask that appears on the table there is traditionally used as a symbol of imitation and therefore of painting. Now the light hanging above the artist, there we go. Painters loved these because it took some real artistic chops to paint all these reflective surfaces. However, a multi-branch chandelier like this would more often be found in a church or a civic building than in a house. And notice it's crowned by a double-headed eagle, a symbol of the Habsburg dynasty, which since the 16th century had governed the 17 provinces of the Netherlands. Let's see, let's go back, look at the whole picture. Now, the map on the wall, which represents the Netherlands 100 years before the work was painted, has a crease in the middle that kind of accentuates the division between the Spanish South and the United Provinces of the North, which is now independent. So the map and the lamp, and along with the figure of Clio, may be references to history in general or simply nostalgia for the days when the Netherlands was united before the war that they were currently in. But we can look at his technique in this work as well. The reflections on the lamp, parts of the tapestry and on the hair, on pieces of material and on Clio's neck, the artist leaves the trace of his brush strokes, calling attention to his manner of painting. And unlike the fine painters of his era who used like a squirrel hair brush, Vermeer used broad brush strokes that he later smoothed out and an almost pointillistic use of white highlight dots, which is why the Impressionists loved Vermeer and were among the ones who rediscovered him in the late 19th century. Now, near the top of the canvas, he has begun depicting the laurel wreath, and notice once again, it's blue instead of the green that one would expect. And this is probably not a mistake. Vermeer only used about 20 pigments. The most serious gap in his palette was a deep, stable green. Dutch painters remedied this by glazing blue paint with a yellow glaze, which allowed the blue to show through with its undertones and so forth. This produced a beautiful natural deep green, but as I said, the glaze sometimes disintegrated so that what would have been green at the time looks blue now. But it did allow them to produce a wide range of greens, which were not available as a single pigment. Now, did Vermeer use the camera obscura? Let's go back here. No documented source has come down to us that suggests that Vermeer knew of or used a camera obscura, but nowadays most people suppose he did use one. But since it would leave no physical trace when it's used, specialists submit that there are 5 aesthetic features in Vermeer's paintings that suggest that he was familiar with this device. One is his absolute precision in perspective. So these floor tiles that he uses, the patterns of the floor tiles and the windows and so forth, they're accurate in perspective. In some other painters, when you have a figure in the center, sometimes the tiles on the floor won't match on both sides, and you never see that happen in Vermeer. Also, precision in his drawings. The painted objects sometimes don't appear to relate to one another properly in perspective space in other painters. You don't see that in Vermeer. Likewise, the camera obscura will compress the wide range of natural brightness to a narrow range, much closer to the range of the artist's pigments, producing an image that lies somewhere between reality and a printed photograph. And that too, the compositional refinement, the camera collapses reality onto a single plane, which if you're an artist at all, you know that it's very difficult to look at something in real life that's 3-dimensional and render it in 2 on a canvas or on a piece of paper. The camera does that for you, makes those decisions for you. Finally, the idea of focus and the depth of field, so that in the front, the drapery closest to us is kind of unfocused. This is not something that's evident in normal vision since the eye is constantly refocusing, but experimentation with camera obscuras of the periods show very similar effects when soft materials are viewed out of focus. And finally, his use of almost pointillism, the white dots, are possibly caused by the flare of the lens. So there you go. Maybe he's just an exceptional painter, and maybe all these things indicate that he was familiar and used a camera obscura. Now, this work in 1940 was purchased by Adolf Hitler from the brother-in-law of Austria's prime minister, who had had it since the 19th century. Hitler wanted it for his own Führer Museum in Linz, which he intended to fill, with all the art he had looted from everywhere, all over Europe. At the end of the war, American troops found it stashed in a vault in an Austrian salt mine, along with thousands of other plundered works. There's the Monuments Men there, led by George Clooney, getting this out of the salt mine. Apparently, in the final months of the war, orders were issued to blow up the mines, but some lower level Nazis said, no, let's not ruin a good salt mine. So they just blew up the entrance to it, blocked the entrance, and saved the work of art. And in 1672, we're getting to the end here, the Netherlands experienced the disaster year when they were fighting both the French and the English. So life and commerce of all sorts ground to a halt. 3 years later, Vermeer died after a short illness at age 43, leaving the family in dire straits. Katharina traded 2 of Vermeer's paintings to the local baker in payment of a 600 guilder debt. In a petition to her creditors, his wife later described his death as follows. During the ruinous war with France, he not only was unable to sell any of his art, but also was left sitting with the paintings of other masters that he was dealing in. Owing to the great burden of his children, which he had so taken to heart, he lapsed into such decay and decadence that, as if he had fallen into a frenzy, in a day and a half, he went from being healthy to being dead. Imagine what he might have done, even producing only 2 or 3 works a year, if he had lived another 20 years. Now, Vermeer, with his 11 children, none of them became artists. If Maria, in fact, worked as an artist, she stopped doing so after Vermeer's death. There's no other evidence that she did. So he did not produce any artists as children, but nevertheless, he has some artistic progeny, absolutely. Did you know, for example, that Salvador Dali was a fan of Vermeer? The ghost of Vermeer that could be used as a table. This, of course, is working with the idea of the art of painting there with the painter seen from behind and those puffed sleeves with the slits in them. I don't know what you call them, same as he's wearing in his outfit. That's very cool. He also was interested in the lace maker. Here you can see her face right in the center and the strings falling out of the cushion in the front and so forth, and her little hands working on this, kind of interesting. And Vermeer's perspective, produced by the camera obscura or not, is often cited as the source of Mondrian's abstractions, right? Another Dutch painter. And of course, we've seen what the girl with a pearl earring has inspired, from the sublime to the ridiculous, we could say. But how about this one? If I rename agreed, this was just sold. And so I saw something about it online. Otherwise, I had never seen this work, but that's pretty good. Now, in more humble practitioners too, Vermeer is an inspiration. In fact, just this spring, Dutch TV aired a 6-program series called The New Vermeer, where contestants who ranged from practicing artists to rank amateurs competed to produce one of the 10 or so missing works. And counted among that group is the concert, the work that was stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. So if you are interested, you can look online and see some of the products of this competition, including these 3 that are versions of the concert. Quite different one to another, some interesting interpretations. They're kind of fascinating in a way, but overall, I think they make us hope that the original is found again and soon so that we can see it. So thank you very much for your attention. And if anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to hear them, see what you're thinking and what's going on.
Thank you, Avril. I have some questions for you.
Okay.
One is, someone asked if the paintings were cropped in your presentation at all.
No.
Great. Yeah, I did look at my pictures from that I took at the museum, and they looked exactly the same to me, just no frames.
Yeah, yeah, no frames, but no, I don't believe any of them are cropped. No, that's how they are.
Great. And then someone asked, in the art of painting, it looked like maybe there was a mask on the table.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, there's a mask on the table. I believe I mentioned it. It's a symbol of imitation, so therefore of painting. So that's an unusual work for Vermeer, because he's usually just very down to earth what's actually in the room. Although the rooms are idealized, they don't have symbolic things in them like that. And the model Cleo with the laurel wreath and so forth, it's an allegory, and that's unusual in his work. But yeah, there's a mask on the table.
Okay. Can you stop your screen share so we can see you in a bigger picture?
Oh, must we? Okay. Okay.
The request was made, so here we are.
I'm looking a little fuzzy in my room here. It's dark.
Okay, so someone else asked, in the maps, it shows the maps with the west at the top.
Yeah.
Was that the standard at the time? Do you know anything about why that was?
Um, I don't know why that was. I just know that the idea that the north is at the top was not standardized then. I don't know if the west was always at the top, or probably it moved around depending on the size of the paper they were working with and so forth. But it was not standard to have the north at the top, which is why it's kind of hard to read them. And likewise, because what was land appears blue, but that's possibly because the glaze has disappeared. It would have been green at the time. Even the girl with a pearl earring, originally the background was greenish. It was glazed, but that's gone away. So, yeah.
So I was quite impressed that someone actually noticed that. So good on whoever asked that question. I've scrolled past your name, but I just want to acknowledge that. There were a couple questions about the girl reading the letter. She appeared to be pregnant, or is that just the style of jacket?
I think that's just the jacket. There's a number of those in art history that looks where women look like they're pregnant, and maybe she is. It's possible, but I think it's just the style of the jacket. Okay. I mean, fabric was expensive, so the more of it you have, the better, right?
Yeah. That's
the case with the Arnolfini wedding, with the green dress that she's holding up like this. That was hideously expensive fabric. So that was a sign that you could afford a bunch of it.
So do we know if Vermeer was self-taught?
We don't really know who taught him. He must have served an apprenticeship of some sort. I mean, that's what they did in those days. But we don't actually know who he worked with. And it was also typical, if you could afford it, to go abroad, to go to Italy or something. No, he didn't do that either. So, yeah.
One of the things you talked about, the girl in the red hat and the girl with the flute, and they were side by side in the exhibit. And they actually, it was the girl with the flute was the only one that said attributed to Vermeer. They actually.
Oh, it does. So they did acknowledge that they're now considering it to be attributed. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So, and I went back and looked at all my pictures to see if there were any others. I didn't see any others that were attributed to him.
Yeah, so. No, I don't think in anything that was there, but I don't know. That's interesting. That's really a first, and it's entirely based on scientific analysis, which is fascinating because until fairly recently, decisions of this sort were made by connoisseurship, by somebody who'd spent their life looking at these things and judged that it was or was not a Vermeer. But now they can do tests and determine. I don't know. I think saying that the hands look like pig's trotters, that's a judgment call to me, but there you go.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I got at the exhibit, I'm not quite sure where, was that, you could see the same rooms, the same props, even the same costuming in many of the paintings, which made it pretty clear that these were not commissioned works. These were works that he enjoyed making, hoped to sell. And it sounds like not all of them sold. Is that right? When he died, he had a number of them still in his.
Yeah, I don't know how many he had. Yeah, I don't think all of them sold necessarily, but yeah, I think you're right. Some of them may have been done on commission, but they're not portraits, which is odd. They're pictures that he did. And he, like Rembrandt, also had a big closet full of costumes. He loved costumes. And so that's what he did. Yeah, he had things.
It's fascinating how pulled into the painting I felt, wondering what they were thinking. The expressions were so beautiful, and it was so different than the more static looks on people's faces you often see in paintings from that time.
Yeah.
Someone asked if you could explain what a camera obscura is.
Okay, so camera obscura is okay, you can see one out at near, what do you call it, the Cliff House in San Francisco. There's one out there. It's an optical phenomenon where you have a dark room with a small hole in it, and if light comes in, the image that's coming in will be reversed on the screen on the opposite wall, and you can trace it. It was a way to trace something. And like any camera, like I said, it reduces 3 dimensions to, and so forth and so on. So it's a very early kind of technology, a way to trace something. It's a natural phenomenon that occurs. And he probably used it. I mean, these people, the idea of the artistic genius slaving away by himself, this comes up in the 19th century. These people were technicians, they were craftsmen. And I imagine in the Netherlands at the time, there was a huge interest in lenses of all sorts and microscopes and all that kind of stuff. And I would imagine if he found a way to help him make a picture better, quicker, he would use it, I would guess. But as I say, there's no physical marks on the painting that indicate that, so they don't really know. Yes, Vermeer forgeries pop up. Yeah. And it's funny to think, looking at those that I showed you from the end from the program, those are not really, really strong. But I mean, if somebody is a really good painter, you could probably forge a credible Vermeer. Whereas think about this, you could not exactly reproduce a Jackson Pollock. Right? You could do something in the style, but you couldn't exactly reproduce it. But a Vermeer, you probably could if you were really good. But watch out for the pig trotters, you know, watch out for grinding the red paint and so forth. So anyway.
Well, Martha Walker tells us that there's a documentary called Tim's Vermeer,
Right.
where a person in current times painted a Vermeer painting, trying to use the materials, camera obscura, etc.
Right.
And she feels it's worth watching.
Yes,
so.
it's really interesting. This has really bothered people, you know, how exactly he did this. And so this was a guy who was not an artist himself, but he studied up and made a camera, you know, and did the whole thing and produced a couple of works, I guess, himself. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Someone asked about your art history training.
Oh, well, it's long. I've been studying art and thinking about art for a long time. I didn't major in it in college. I majored in English and comparative literature, but I've been doing this a long time, and I'm a docent now, or was. We're not doing it anymore, at SFMOMA, and learned an awful lot that way. Not about Vermeer, obviously. Yeah. Good.
So someone asked about the last painting. I think it was the art of painting. It looked like there was a stick with a small ball at the end, and she asked, "What's that about? What was that item?"
Is it a maul stick in his hand? Does he have it in his hand? Sometimes that's a maul stick they use to keep their hand steady when they're painting. I don't know where the stick with the ball was. I'd have to look back, but
okay,
it's like looks like that. Yeah, maybe that's what it was. Okay. Yeah.
And have there been documented forgeries of Vermeer's paintings that have shown up over time?
I think so. I'm trying to think that Dutch guy, Han van Meegeren, he did lots of forgeries. And so, yeah, I'm not sure, but I think there probably have been, you know. It's an irresistible lure, I guess.
Someone's asking what makes a reflective surface so difficult to paint?
How to get the light on it and how to indicate its curvature and so forth. I mean, this is well, all these painters, Renaissance painters, but particularly the Dutch. I mean, painting a glass with liquid in it and like the reflection of the window from outside on the glass that has liquid in it. These things are really difficult to do, apparently. I'm not a painter myself, but this is what they say, that it's very difficult to do. Thank you, Marlene. Anyway.
Well, there are many, somebody asked, are there any local museums that have Vermeers?
I don't think so. They have been at the De Young. I don't think so. No, I should check. I don't think so.
I don't remember seeing any. I thought somewhere in LA there might have been a museum that contributed a painting to the exhibit.
I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
All right. Yeah, New York had a lot of paintings.
Yeah, New York has a bunch.
Washington, yeah.
Yeah, in Washington. Yeah. Those guys with deep pockets and
a long time ago too.
Yeah. Over there and got them. Yeah. And they snapped them up.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it for tonight. Avril. Thank you so much. We have a lot of people saying thank you and what a wonderful presentation it was, and how much they appreciate all the hard work you did and the beautiful presentation. So thank you very much.
Great, thank
One
you.
more time for a wonderful program.
Yeah, I'm sorry we can't all go and see it in person, but this is close enough, a little bit close.
I noticed there were 2 other people watching that had seen it also in addition to me. So there were 3 of
yeah,
us that had
3 of
been
you.
there to see it.
Okay, cool. Very
Yeah.
good. All
Yeah.
right.
So,
Thank you all very
thank you
much.
very much, Avril.
Okay. See you
so
again next time.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight. I'd like to remind you about upcoming programs. On June 14th, we'll have an art docent program called Beyond Bollywood, 2000 Years of Dance in Art. June 28th, we'll have an author program for the book, You Are Not Expected to Understand This. It's a book about a line of code that changed the world, according to the authors, the editor and the authors. So we'll hear from a few of those at that program. And July 12th, an art docent program on wood block prints called Layers of Color. We appreciate you coming tonight. We'd really appreciate a donation if you can find it in your budget to send us a little bit of money tonight. We'd appreciate that very much. And also remember that we did record this event tonight. And so you'll be able to find the recording on our YouTube channel and also on our website at alamedafriends.com in probably about 3 or 4 days. So thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next time.